This is Will, and I'm Shozab, and we will be the moderators for tonight's event. 6 years after the boycott, divestment, and sanctions call from Palestinian civil society, we would like to welcome you to the 7th Israeli Apartheid Week. Israeli Apartheid Week began right here in Toronto all those years ago, and since then has taken place in over 94 cities worldwide, including cities in South Africa, Palestine, Europe, and the US. So far, we've had a successful week with a great turnout and great speakers, including a tremendous turnout at Judith Butler's keynote talk on Wednesday. The title for tonight's discussion is State of Siege, State of the Struggle, the Case for Boycott, Divestment, Sanctions. And to speak on this topic, we are lucky to have Riham Barghouti and Ali Abunima.
Okay, so we would like to begin tonight by recognizing that as we gather this week to assert our opposition to colonialism and apartheid, and our solidarity with Indigenous struggles for dignity and self-determination, we, as the organizers of Israeli Apartheid Week in Toronto, believe that we cannot speak meaningfully about Israeli apartheid without speaking first about the treatment of Indigenous peoples in Canada and the apartheid. Canada's reserve system and treatment of Indigenous peoples was closely studied by the planners of apartheid in South Africa, although this is a hidden chapter of our history. From its very foundations, Canada has been based on the theft of Indigenous lands and the genocide and displacement of Indigenous peoples. In crucial ways, the Canadian state's treatment of Indigenous peoples, historically and currently, can be described as an apartheid system. From the imposition of the Indian Act, band councils, and the reserve system, to stolen children in residential schools, from the continued theft of land and resources by governments and corporations, to the cultural appropriation of native traditions and culture. In the face of more than 500 years of colonialism, Indigenous communities continue to resist and survive. Their multiple and diverse struggles demand our active support, especially in the face of state repression and criminalization. As non-natives, we have a role within our own communities to further the process of decolonizing Canada. If you are with us in opposition to Israeli apartheid, we encourage your consistent opposition to apartheid right here in Canada. Let us support both the resistance of Indigenous Palestinians and the survival and struggles of Canada's Indigenous nations. From Palestine to Turtle Island, there is no justice on stolen land.
Without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Riham Barghouti. Riham Barghouti is a founding member of the Palestinian Campaign for the Academic and Cultural Boycott of Israel, which is part of the PDS National Committee in Palestine. Riham is also a founding member of Underland, New York, the New York Campaign for the Boycott of Israel. Underland, New York has been carrying out a successful boycott campaign against Israel's settlement builder Lev Leviev's since 2007. Riham lived in Palestine from 1995 to 2005, during which time she worked at Birzeit University and earned her master's in gender, law, and development. She also holds a master's in education and is currently a teacher in New York City. Please join me in welcoming Riham Barghouti.
Wow, what an honor and what an exciting time to be here. This must be an especially proud moment for the University of Toronto. To be hosting the 7th annual Israeli Apartheid Week, which I think at this point really needs to be renamed Israeli Apartheid Month. a one-week series of lectures held in University of Toronto in 2005, it has become an international phenomenon, spanning several weeks and taking place in over 80 cities around the globe, with lectures, debates, discussions, and presentations that not only expose the reality of Israeli apartheid, but provide the basis for concerted actions to end Israeli violations of international law and Palestinian rights in the form of boycotts and divestments. A recent article in Haaretz calls Israeli Apartheid Week an annual headache for pro-Israeli organizations, a growing concern for Israeli diplomats, and probably the worst time on campus for Israeli students. However, for us, Israeli Apartheid Week symbolizes and is a testament to the creativity, ingenuity, and the power of youth today. And it is these same elements that are present in the revolutionary movements taking place across the Arab world, in Tunis and in Egypt and in Libya and in Yemen and in Bahrain and in Oman and elsewhere. And there is no doubt that these movements have been informed by the Palestinian struggle for independence, and especially the slogans and chants and methods of resistance that we witnessed in Palestine during the First Intifada. At the same time, the impact of these revolutions on the region as a whole, and the Palestinian struggle in particular, as well as struggles for freedom, justice, and rights throughout the globe, have already been considerable. These movements have presented the possibility of a new world order, one in which the absolute power of governments is finally being challenged and rendered accountable to the will of the people. For a very long time, I have felt as if all we were doing, all we could do, as Palestinians and as solidarity activists, was tread water against the seemingly overwhelming tide of colonialism and oppression taking place in Palestine. Israel's increasing ferocity as an occupying and colonial power, direly exposed in the 2008-2009 attacks on Gaza, its expansionist policies with the spread of settlements and the construction of the apartheid wall, coupled with the unmitigated support from the United States and Europe, and the complicity of the corrupt Arab regimes and a puppet Palestinian leadership as uninterested in justice as its colonizers, was met with a reverberating silence by the majority of the world citizenry, rendering many of us feeling powerless. The current Palestinian BDS movement against Israel, which is built on a long history of Palestinian nonviolent resistance and is inspired by the South African anti-apartheid movement, enabled a number of us to counteract that feeling of powerlessness. BDS entailed moving beyond the futile attempts at education and awareness raising as an end unto themselves to taking proactive measures and educating and raising awareness of others to ensure that they take proactive measures that directly targeted Israel and the impunity it had enjoyed up until now. We could not have imagined the seemingly isolated calls for boycott and divestment from the 2001 World Conference Against Racism in Durban, South Africa, to the church divestment movements in the US, Canada, and Europe, to the calls for boycott and divestment by British and Canadian unions, to the divestment initiatives in university campuses, could have one decade mushroomed into a global boycott, divestment, and sanctions civil society movement capable of pushing institutions as well as governments to take action to uphold international law. The BDS movement has enabled a shift in the power relations between the oppressor and the oppressed. For once, activists are not responding haphazardly to individual Israeli practices. We are taking actions to end the system upon which these practices are predicated, and as such are forcing that system and its proponents to respond. And over the past 10 years, the responses have become increasingly reactionary and defensive. At first, they tried to ignore it, but as the movement expanded to several continents and BDS initiatives were being carried out within a variety of civil society groupings, ignoring it became increasingly difficult. So they attempted to delegitimize it with claims of anti-Semitism. However, this claim was quickly refuted by the ethical stance of the BDS movement, which from the onset differentiated between the Israeli government and institutions and individual Israelis and Jews, a number of whom themselves opposed Israeli apartheid. These anti-Zionists, Jews and Israelis, were welcomed into the movement and have made a wide range of significant contributions, especially inside Israel and in the United States, and often to their own personal detriment. Israel and its proponents also tried to scare individuals and organizations by attacking them, threatening legal action, dismissing individuals from their jobs, creating watch lists that target individual organizations. And I would like you to know that Israeli Apartheid Week made it onto the NGO Monitor, which is a self-appointed Israeli website that provides information about various anti-Israeli activities. Adela, New York, and myself now also have profiles, I guess because of this talk. Working to reverse universal jurisdiction in the UK so that Israeli war criminals are not arrested when they travel, and attempting to make boycott actions by individuals and organizations in the US illegal, trying to make it illegal to use the word apartheid in relation to Israel in Canadian universities, the cancellation of events and attempts to stop or counter Israeli Apartheid Week in the United States and Canada, arresting Palestinian and Israeli BDS organizers in the West Bank, prohibiting Palestinian BDS activists from traveling abroad, including, and I don't think it's any coincidence that after the publication of Riham Barghouti's book, he has up until now not been given a visa to come to the United States for his April tour. And promoting the boycott law, which targets both Israelis and international boycott advocates, are all but a few of the examples of Israel's attempt to quell the growing BDS movement. More moderate Israelis and their allies, the so-called left, have tried to co-opt or mitigate the movement by criticizing Israel's occupation and calling on limited boycott actions which only target the occupation as a more pragmatic goal. The denial of the other two demands of the Palestinian BDS call, for Israel to recognize and implement the right of return of all Palestinian refugees and grant equal rights to Palestinian citizens of Israel, can only be seen as an attempt to sidestep the Palestinian leadership and halt the growing movement. However, rather than quell the movement, these actions have exposed the myths propagated by Israel and its proponents. They have heightened individual and groups' awareness of not only the illegality of Israel's actions within Palestine, but also the lengths to which Israel would go to silence any opposition in the international community and to maintain its apartheid system. Today, there are successful BDS campaigns directed at diverse economic, academic, and cultural targets being carried out by churches, unions, university groups, and community groups in the United Kingdom, France, Ireland, Norway, the Netherlands, Sweden, Denmark, Italy, Spain, Turkey, South Africa, India, Australia, Brazil, Canada, and the US, to name but a few. In October of 2010, a BDS conference in Montreal was convened with activists mainly from Canada and the United States. And the workshops focused on different aspects of the BDS movement: cultural boycott, the labor movement, consumer boycott, queer organizing for BDS, and academic boycott and divestment. Groups and individuals had the opportunity to share resources and experiences and discuss future directions for BDS in North America. And although there are a number of apparent differences between BDS and activism in the US and Canada, and I can tell you quite clearly, you're ahead of us in leaps and bounds when it comes to the labor movement, when it comes to university divestments, as shown with your decision this week, your announcement this week of the University of Toronto and York University's decisions to divest, and also with another important aspect, which is the integration of the indigenous struggle for rights and freedoms that we in the US have failed to do. It is clear that there is a need for more information exchange, especially around student activists who are experiencing a lot of the similar challenges in carrying out BDS actions on campus. And as such, I'd just like to take a few minutes to talk about the campus divestment movement in the United States. This movement in the United States, as elsewhere, actually predated the Palestinian call of 2005. So as early as 2001 and 2002, there were a number of university campaigns calling for divestment from Berkeley, California, to Harvard, MIT, Columbia, Michigan, Illinois. And there was a national divestment conference on strategy for pro-Palestinian campus activism in February of 2002. While many of these campaigns faltered, they nevertheless were essential and need to be credited for providing important moral support to Palestinians who at that time were under brutal Israeli attacks throughout the West Bank, in Jenin, Ramallah, Nablus, and Hebron, as well as in the Gaza Strip. Further, these campaigns were the forerunners to the more effective divestment campaigns we are witnessing today in US and Canada. They provided important insight into effective and ineffective strategies and tactics. And among the lessons learned were the need for clear goals, accurate information regarding university investments and methods of divestment, the need for coalition building prior to launching a campaign, and the need for preparedness in the face of the counter-movement that would inevitably emerge once the campaign went public. In a milestone achievement, Hampshire College in 2009 became the first college in the US to divest from 6 companies that profit from the Israeli occupation. Fittingly, yeah, they do deserve a round of applause.